August 3rd, 1492. 3 ships, 90 men, and one impossible dream. This is the story of how a handful of visionaries defied all odds, crossed impossible oceans, and carried something more precious than gold to an unknown world. This is the story of faith in the face of ridicule, providence in the midst of disaster, and divine timing that shaped a nation. But before these 3 ships, there was a shipwreck.
1476. A young sailor named Christopher Columbus climbed to wreckage as his ship sank beneath him. The cold Atlantic tried to claim him, but someone had other plans. Against impossible odds, Columbus reached shore, barely alive, but alive. He would later say this was no accident. This was preservation for a purpose. Years passed. The young survivor became a scholar. He studied the Bible intensely. He compiled prophecies. He calculated the very shape of the earth using ancient texts, and he became convinced of something extraordinary: that God had saved him from the ocean for a divine mission, to carry the gospel to the ends of the earth, to find gold that would fund a crusade to liberate Jerusalem, to prepare the world for Christ's return. In his own name, he saw destiny. Christopher, Christ-bearer, the impossible dream. For years, Columbus tried to convince the courts of Europe to fund his westward voyage. Portugal's King John II rejected him. Spain's Royal Commission mocked him. The experts calculated his mathematics and declared him a fool. He lived in poverty, supported by monks who believed in his vision, ridiculed by scholars who knew better. But something extraordinary was happening. While Columbus waited and prayed, Spain was fighting its final battle against the Moors, an 800-year struggle for the soul of the Iberian Peninsula. And then, in January 1492, the impossible happened. Granada fell. The last Islamic stronghold in Spain surrendered. After 8 centuries, the Reconquista was complete. Ferdinand and Isabella, the monarchs, had won. But they were exhausted. Their treasury was empty. Their armies needed rest. And then Columbus appeared before them again, asking for ships, asking for gold, asking them to gamble on a dream. The Queen's advisors said no. This Genoese sailor was persistent but delusional. His calculations were wrong. The Earth was larger than he thought. He would never make it. Columbus began packing. He would try France, maybe England. Someone had to listen. But then, a miracle. Juan Perez, a Franciscan friar and the Queen's confessor, sent an urgent message to Isabella. This man's vision, he said, was prophetic. This voyage was ordained. Just as Columbus was leaving Spain forever, a messenger caught up with him on the road. The Queen wanted to see him immediately. The timing was perfect, almost divinely perfect. Granada had just fallen. The Queen was flush with victory. And in that moment of triumph, she made a decision that would change the world. She would pawn her own jewelry to finance this voyage. The voyage of faith. 33 days at sea, no land in sight, provisions running low, the crew growing desperate. Mutiny whispered in the shadows below deck. Columbus had promised them the Indies, spices, gold, glory. But all they saw was water, endless water. On October 10th, the crew confronted him. Turn back, now, or they would throw him overboard and sail home themselves. Columbus made a deal. 3 more days. Just 3. If they saw no land, they would turn around. He went to his cabin and he prayed. On October 11th, signs appeared. A branch with green leaves floating in the water, a carved stick, birds overhead, flying as if toward land. That night, as Columbus stood on deck, he saw it. A light, distant, flickering, moving as if carried by someone on shore. Hours later, at 2 a.m, a lookout cried from the crow's nest, "Tierra! Tierra! Land!" October 12th, 1492. After 33 days of impossible odds and answered prayers, Christopher Columbus stepped onto the shores of San Salvador. The first thing he did was fall to his knees, plant a cross, and pray. O Lord, almighty and everlasting God, by thy holy word thou hast created the heaven and the earth and the sea. Blessed and glorified be thy name, which hath deigned to use us, thy humble servants, that thy holy name may be proclaimed in this second part of the earth. Columbus's prayer upon landing. The temptation. Columbus had found a new world, but he had not found what he was looking for. These islands held no spices, no silks, no route to China. But they did have gold. Small amounts worn as ornaments by the native peoples, enough to catch the eye, enough to kindle greed. When Columbus returned to Spain in triumph, he brought not just news of new lands, he brought natives as evidence, and he brought gold. The Spanish court was electrified. More voyages were funded, more ships sent, and with each voyage, the mission began to change. Columbus still believed his purpose was higher, to fund Jerusalem's liberation, to spread the gospel, to prepare for Christ's return. I hope to God that when I come back here from Castile, I will find a barrel of gold for which these people have traded, and that they will have found the gold mine and the spices, and in such quantities that within 3 years the sovereigns will prepare for and undertake the reconquest of the Holy Land. Columbus, December 26, 1492. But others came with different dreams. Conquistadors, adventurers, men who saw gold as an end in itself, not a means to a higher purpose. The lust for gold would corrupt the mission. It would bring suffering to the native peoples, slavery, exploitation, violence. Columbus would see his dream twisted. His final voyages would be marked by betrayal, imprisonment, and heartbreak. He would die in 1506, largely forgotten, believing he had failed. But God's purposes are not always clear in the moment. What looked like failure was in fact the opening of a door through which something far greater than gold would pass. Because 128 years later, another group would cross that same ocean, not seeking gold, not seeking glory, seeking only one thing: freedom to worship God. Act 2. The Pilgrims. Exiles for conscience. England, early 1600s. The Church of England controlled all religious life. To worship outside its authority was illegal. To separate from it was treason. But a small group of believers in Scrooby could not, in good conscience, submit. They believed the Church had strayed from Scripture, that true believers must gather separately, in purity. They called themselves separatists. The authorities called them criminals. Arrested, fined, imprisoned, persecuted in their own homeland for daring to read the Bible and worship as their conscience demanded. They had two choices: submit or flee. In 1608, they chose to flee. To Holland. To Leiden, where the Dutch granted them religious tolerance. For 12 years, they lived in peace. They worked hard, raised their children, worshipped freely. But peace came with a price. Their children were becoming Dutch, learning Dutch customs, Dutch language, drifting from their English heritage and their parents' faith. And war was coming. The 30 Years' War was about to engulf Europe. Leiden, their safe haven, would soon be a battleground. Once again, they faced a choice: stay and watch their community dissolve, or risk everything on an even more dangerous journey. America. They knew they were pilgrims, and looked not much on those things, but lifted up their eyes to the heavens, their dearest country, and quieted their spirits. William Bradford. The Storm-Tossed Voyage. September 6th, 1620. The Mayflower departed Plymouth, England. 102 passengers. Only 35 were separatists. The rest were hired workers, soldiers, and families seeking economic opportunity. They were meant to land in Virginia, where other English colonies had already settled, where there was at least some structure, some hope of survival. But the Atlantic had other plans. For 66 days, they endured hell on water. Violent storms battered the tiny ship. Waves crashed over the deck. The ship's main beam cracked, threatening to break the vessel apart. Families huddled below deck in darkness, soaked, freezing, terrified. One passenger was swept overboard in a storm. Miraculously, he caught a trailing rope and was pulled back aboard. Only one person died during the voyage, and one was born. A baby boy named Oceanus, delivered in the midst of the Atlantic. But the storms did more than terrify them. The storms pushed them north, far north of Virginia, into waters no English colonist had charted. Some called it misfortune. Others called it fraud by the ship's crew. But William Bradford would later call it providence. Because when they finally sighted land on November 11th, they found themselves at Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Nowhere near Virginia, far from any English authority, and far from the deadly swamps and malaria that had killed thousands in Jamestown. They had been driven to a place that was isolated, yes, harsh, yes, but safer, and completely outside the jurisdiction of the Virginia Company that had granted their patent. They were free, truly free, to govern themselves, to worship as they saw fit. Before they even set foot on land, they gathered in the ship's cabin and created something unprecedented: a covenant. A government formed by the consent of the governed under God. The Mayflower Compact. And when they finally landed, they fell to their knees, just as Columbus had. Having found a good haven, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean. William Bradford. The bitter winter. They had arrived in November, winter in New England, the worst possible time. No shelter built, no crops planted, no allies, no knowledge of how to survive in this wilderness. What followed was horror. They built crude shelters, but the cold seeped through. Disease swept through the colony. Scurvy, pneumonia, starvation. By March, half of them were dead. 51 people, gone. Entire families wiped out. Wives lost husbands. Children lost parents. At one point, Only 6 or 7 people were healthy enough to care for the dying. And those 6 or 7, led by Elder William Brewster, did something extraordinary. They nursed the sick, fetched wood, prepared food, without complaint, without fear for their own lives. They loved their neighbors, even unto death. And somehow, remarkably, the disease did not spread further. Those who served did not fall ill. But here is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Because the Pilgrims had landed in one specific spot on the entire Atlantic coast, a place called Patuxet, and Patuxet had been emptied. 4 years earlier, a plague had swept through the region, a disease likely brought by European fishing vessels. It killed 90% of the coastal tribes. Patuxet, once a thriving village, was now a ghost town. The fields still faintly visible, buried caches of corn seed waiting in the ground. The Pilgrims found those seeds. They fed on them. They survived. It is to be noted as a special providence of God and a great mercy to these poor people that here they got seed to plant corn the next year, or else they might have starved. Let his holy name have all the praise. William Bradford. But the providence was only beginning. Divine connections. The impossible ally. March 16th, 1621. The Pilgrims, weak and grieving, were working near their settlement when a figure emerged from the forest. A native man, tall, walking confidently toward them. The Pilgrims froze, reached for their muskets. Every encounter with natives so far had been tense, hostile. They expected violence. And then the man spoke, in English. Welcome. His name was Samoset. He had learned English from fishermen up the coast. And he had news. There was another man, someone who spoke even better English, someone who could help them. Days later, Samoset returned, and with him came Squanto. Squanto's story is almost too extraordinary to believe. He had been born in Patuxet, the very village where the Pilgrims now lived. Years before, he had been kidnapped by English explorers and taken to Europe. He learned English in London. When he finally escaped and returned home in 1619, he found his entire village dead from the plague. Every single person, his family, his friends, gone. He was the sole survivor of Patuxet. And now, a year later, English settlers had arrived at that exact spot. Lost, starving, in desperate need of someone who spoke their language and knew how to survive in this land. Squanto taught them everything. How to plant corn using fish as fertilizer, where to hunt, where to fish, how to navigate the seasons. He negotiated peace with Massasoit, the chief of the Wampanoag, a peace treaty that would last over 50 years. William Bradford would later write, Squanto was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. Think about the timing. A plague clears Patuxet exactly when it would allow the Pilgrims to settle without conflict. Squanto, the one survivor, learns English in captivity, returns home just in time to meet the Pilgrims, speaks their language, knows their exact location better than anyone alive. Coincidence or providence? The harvest of hope. Under Squanto's guidance, the Pilgrims planted crops in spring, and they grew abundantly. From buried corn seeds, they reaped a miraculous harvest. From near starvation, they found themselves with plenty. In October 1621, they celebrated, A 3-day feast with Massasoit and 90 Wampanoag warriors. Games, deer, turkey, corn, fellowship. The first Thanksgiving. Our harvest being gotten in, we might, after a special manner, rejoice together. By the goodness of God we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of our plenty. Edward Winslow. And then, in November, another ship arrived, the Fortune, bringing 35 more settlers, more hands, more strength, more hope. The colony that had been dying was now thriving. The light carried forward. Sunrise over Plymouth, settlement growing, people working together. William Bradford would reflect on these events with wonder. He saw the hand of God in every detail. The storms that drove them to a safer place, the plague that cleared the land, the buried seeds, Squanto's impossible arrival, the harvest, the peace. Thus, out of small beginnings, greater things have been produced by His hand, and gives being to all things that are now in being. William Bradford. These pilgrims did not come for gold. They came for freedom. Freedom to worship God according to their conscience. Freedom to raise their children in faith. Freedom to build a community under God's authority. And in doing so, they planted something in American soil that would grow beyond their wildest imagination. A covenant community. Self-governing, bound together not by force, but by mutual agreement under God. A city on a hill, a light to the nations. They did not know they were founding a nation. They were simply trying to survive, to worship, to be faithful. But God had larger plans. Plymouth growing, more settlements, churches, schools, communities spreading. From Plymouth, the light would spread. Massachusetts Bay Colony, Connecticut, Rhode Island, communities built on the same principles: covenant, self-government, religious freedom. Over the next century, hundreds of thousands would cross that same ocean. Some seeking wealth, yes, but many seeking the same thing the pilgrims sought: a place where they could worship freely, where conscience was sacred, where faith could flourish. They carried the gospel to a continent. They built schools and churches. They created laws based on biblical principles. They established representative government. And from these small, fragile beginnings, a nation would emerge. A nation that, for all its flaws and failures, would become a beacon of liberty, a refuge for the oppressed, a light on a hill. American landscapes, diverse faces, churches, the Constitution, Liberty Bell, all fading into light. This is not a story of perfection. It is a story of providence, of impossible voyages, miraculous survivals, divine timing, of a man who survived a shipwreck and opened a world, of exiles who crossed an ocean seeking only freedom to worship and founded a nation, of a plague that cleared a village at exactly the right moment, of a survivor who learned English just in time, of buried seeds that fed the starving. Some call it luck, others call it coincidence, but those who lived it called it by another name: providence. We shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. John Winthrop, 1630.